We never had those protocols in place. We never knew that, okay, COVID patient comes in, what do we do? Right? What is the next thing that we did not even know any of that. And the world didn't know. When I say we, it's not just India. We are updating it every day, every week, every month. So you can get all these frequencies. You can actually filter the dashboard and you can say, okay, I want to see monthly, quarterly, yearly, how X district compared to Y. Prime Minister believes that, entrepreneurship is the way forward for India. That is how we're going to create maximum jobs. We're going to, have a vibrant economy. So that is the role of AIM. Is to work with school children and really help them understand the whole innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem.
I see.
Because we constantly talk of looking outside India for good practices, for best practices. Whenever you hear of a best practice, people say, "Acha, that happened in UK, or that happened in Finland, or that happened here or there." Yeah. But I say that, why don't you look at your own country?
Urvashi Prasad ji, welcome to the podcast. It's very nice to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So, ma'am, you are with NITI Aayog. Before we begin, could you please give a brief introduction of what your role is and what your background is?
So, I'm a director working with the vice chairman. The chairman of the NITI Aayog is the Prime Minister himself. And the vice chairman is somebody who's in the rank of a union cabinet minister. So I work with his office. I've been at NITI now for over 7 years.
I see.
So pretty much since it started and replaced the Planning Commission. My background, my training academically is in public health. So I worked at NITI on a whole range of social sector areas. So health and nutrition, gender, sanitation. But of course, with the vice chairman, I look at other issues as well.
Right. So when I was a kid, we used to hear about the Planning Commission. We had these 5-year plans and all. And then the Planning Commission was ended, disbanded, whatever you want to call it. And NITI Aayog took its place or it came up as the new structure. So could you talk about the transition? What was the role of the Planning Commission? And what does NITI Aayog do that the old structure wasn't doing?
So, the Planning Commission had a huge role in allocating funds to states.
Okay.
So, there was a need felt in the initial years that we needed more centralized planning.
Okay.
So, the center had a greater say in fund allocation. And that is where the Planning Commission had a very big role. Of course, it performed other functions also of monitoring, evaluation, various other roles, some of which NITI also continues to do. But the fund allocation is the major difference, that now NITI doesn't really get involved in allocation of funds to states.
I see.
We are primarily a think tank, a policy think tank. And the whole vision of the Prime Minister was that, India has moved and changed a lot, from when we first started and when the Planning Commission was designed. And we cannot have an overly centralized model of planning.
Okay.
India, is not one country, as I say, and he also often says, we are several countries. If you look at Uttar Pradesh, in terms of population alone,
US.
It would, probably be the 4th or the 5th largest country in the world. So in terms of population, scale, diversity, we cannot sit in New Delhi and decide for the whole of India what should be the kind of fund allocation. So that is why NITI Aayog is a different philosophy. We do work very closely with state governments, but that is to provide them with the best of policy thinking, the best of research ideas, to also work a lot with the private sector, with civil society, so that we can bring in the freshest ideas into the policy making space. That is really our role now, as opposed to just deciding, who gets how much money. So that is one big shift. But of course, we also, like I said, we continue to do monitoring and evaluation of government schemes and programs. That's an attached office of NITI Aayog, which performs those functions. And we also have what is called the Atal Innovation Mission.
Okay.
Where really the vision is that we want to familiarize every child with the concept of innovation, with the concept of entrepreneurship very early on. Because again, the Prime Minister believes that, entrepreneurship is the way forward for India. That is how we're going to create maximum jobs. We're going to, have a vibrant economy. So that is the role of AIM, is to work with school children and really help them understand the whole innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem.
I see. So these are the major roles of
Yes,
NITI Aayog.
that's right.
So when you say it's a think tank, what's the structure like? And how does it interface with the various states?
So the chairperson, as I said, is the Prime Minister himself. Then we have the vice chairperson. We also have the CEO who actually runs the sort of daily administrative functioning. So currently it's Mr. BVR Subramaniam. He used to be the Commerce Secretary. And NITI Aayog, we're actually a very complex structure because we have what we call verticals or divisions, which are mapped to every ministry of the government, right?
So how many ministries do we have?
I think we have somewhere around 66.
So each of these is a vertical at NITI.
Yeah. So we have so sometimes we have a vertical which is looking at different ministries also. But basically, pretty much every ministry and every sector of the government is covered by some vertical or the other of NITI Aayog. And equally, every vertical looks at least 2 or 3 states as well.
I see.
So each of these verticals is headed by a joint secretary level officer. So, and then there is a mix of both people from the government in those verticals, as well as a lot of talent from the outside.
I see. Okay.
What we call lateral entrance.
Lateral entrance. Okay.
And again, this is something which I think has been the Prime Minister's vision. I think there's still a long way to go before we can fully realize that vision, obviously, because lateral entry is not easy to achieve. But NITI Aayog is one institution where we have a very large share of lateral entrance, young professionals, consultants, experts, specialists, from various domains who have come here and they want to get good experience in the government, but they also want to contribute. They bring a lot of skills of their own, research experience of their own, which they want to bring to the policy making space. So NITI Aayog also provides them an opportunity to do that. And in that way, I think it's perhaps one of the most uniquely structured institutions, in the government, where we have such a healthy mix of people from within the government system, the bureaucracy, the permanent sort of career civil servants, and lateral entrants, who might come for short periods of time and, then might move out to do something else.
So what's the overall, roughly the strength, numerically of NITI Aayog, and where is it based?
So it would be around 400 to 500 people.
I see.
Planning Commission used to be almost double the size. Yeah. So it's much leaner now in terms of the number of people. It's based in the same building, which the Planning Commission used to be. So it used to be called the Yojana Bhavan, but now it's called Niti Bhavan. And so it's located in the same place on Sansad Marg in Delhi. But yeah, it's a much leaner organization in terms of number of people.
Okay. And it's involved in policy framing, policy recommendations and things like that?
Yes, that's right. In different sectors. So like I said, we have these different divisions and verticals. And each of these is constantly reviewing proposals, that different ministries are working on. Or even cabinet notes, come to us for comments, for inputs. Or when a funding is being decided for a particular scheme. Like I said that, we are not the ones who have the final say, but we certainly give our inputs.
So you give recommendations of what kind of funding is...
Yes, exactly. Or, whether a scheme is doing well or it's not doing well.
So monitoring, evaluation.
Exactly. So, should it be continued? Should it be revamped? So we certainly give those kind of inputs to finance, which, then makes the final decision on the allocations, etc. But our inputs are definitely sought at all these stages.
So you interface with the central government, but you also interface with various state governments.
That's right.
So how does that work out? How is it done? Yeah.
So, in fact, the mandate given to us by the Prime Minister was, something called Cooperative and Competitive Federalism, which means that we're a friend of the states in the center. That's really in one line, how we are supposed to function. And which means that whatever issues states have, challenges they have that they wish to resolve, because there's always a lot of issues between the center and the states in a federal democracy, right? So we try and, help as an intermediary between the center and the states, because we're obviously working with all the central ministries here, but we're also partnering with states to address their issues. So we are kind of an intermediary. And also we try to foster competition among states, because that is something that as a philosophy has really evolved in the last few years, that we need to be able to identify where every state is, whether it's on health, whether it's on education, whether it's in creating jobs, ease of doing business. We need to know where every state is with respect to another. So there's a lot of indices that NITI Aayog has created in the past for ranking states. And we also have an aspirational districts program and now an aspirational blocks program, where we have identified some of the poorest or the least developed districts and blocks in the country. And of course, it's a whole series of interventions, that we implement there, which, I can talk more about. But again, the philosophy there is that we want those districts, those blocks to compete with each other on development parameters. So we do a very transparent ranking. And we also put out a lot of this in the public domain, so that there is some amount of accountability. And there is also a sense of motivation for the bureaucracy in these districts and then in these states, that we have some reason why we should be pushing on a particular front, or why we should try and improve, because a lot of times a district which shows the maximum improvement, you've had the Prime Minister himself recognizing that, on a national level, applauding that progress. So there's also some incentive and motivation. Otherwise, often people in the government, you feel like, where is that motivation going to come from? Why should I really push myself to implement this program better? So this sort of system of competition also instills a little bit of that.
Lots of questions from what you said. First of all, competition and cooperation at the same time. Now, how do you ensure that there is fair competition? You have a behemoth the size of Uttar Pradesh. You have a tiny state like Sikkim. How do you get them to somehow cooperate and compete at the same time? How can a tiny state compete with a huge state?
No, that's a great question. And that is something that we get asked a lot with, the different indices that we've made. So what we actually focus on is more the improvement from the baseline.
All right.
For any one particular state. So
percentage-wise?
Yes. So as opposed to saying that, we're looking at a one-on-one comparison between a Kerala and a Bihar or a UP and a Sikkim, as you said, we're saying, UP started from X and Kerala started from Y. But now, how much does each state improve every year? So compared to your own baseline, how much are you able to move forward? So that is something that we're looking more at in terms of relative improvements, because obviously, if we start doing comparisons across states,
the mass itself is different.
It's very difficult, and so we try to firstly look at relative, improvements. Then, of course, we also acknowledge that the states which are already very ahead of the curve, they will show slower relative improvements year on year, because somebody who's already at 90, it's much harder for them to get to 95 or 99 vis-a-vis somebody who's at 30 or 40 to get to 60 or 70. So I think we do, we always acknowledge that in all our reports. But I think it's still useful to be able to measure that delta.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because it gives feedback, to the states. It gives feedback, like I said, even at the district level, to the district magistrates, that this is where we are moving forward. This is where our progress has stagnated. This is where we need to do better. Or this is where is the next frontier for us. So say a state is already very good with tackling maternal, reproductive, child health. Maybe the next frontier for them is the non-communicable diseases, the cancer, the diabetes. You need to perform better there. So I think it's the indices are always to some extent flawed, because a lot of us, also come from an academic background. We would have a tendency, we would rip apart the indices internally and we would say, this is not going to work, and so we acknowledge actually in our reports themselves that these are not without limitations. Of course, these are with limitations, but we still feel the benefits somewhere outweigh, these limitations. And there is a value in still putting out data, in talking about data, because it gets people, chief ministers at the highest level to start talking about these things. Just because a NITI Aayog report came out, if a chief minister is even discussing what is happening in their state on health or education or skills, that's a great achievement. That's a great outcome. So I think we accept that there's limitations. We try to obviously minimize, we try to improve our methodology. We always get it vetted by, external partners.
Okay.
So that, it's not just us who is saying something, but we have the backing of somebody who has that rigorous academic, lens with which they look at it. But I think we see a great benefit on the governance side of why we should do something like this. And so we've continued to do it.
Right. So, see, these metrics are never going to be absolutely ideal and all that. The real world and the theoretical world are very different. The ideal gas law is different from the real gas law. But these indices that you spoke about, so what are these indices like? Are they available in the public domain, and are they available state-wise or more granularly, like district-wise and so on?
Yes. So we have certain, indices like health. We have a water index. We have an SDG index, Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay.
So, in fact, Sustainable Development Goals is sort of a composite index, which covers various sectors. So, if you just want to look at any one index to get a fairly good idea of, where the state is going in terms of various development parameters, and I think the SDG index is a good place to go to.
Okay.
Because there you will find health also, education also, gender also, various indices related to environment, to the, economic situation, because Sustainable Development Goals covers all these sectors, in a way. So, so those indices are, of course, at the state level. But we also have indices, especially like for the aspirational districts. Like I said, that it's less about the index there, but it's more about putting out the ranking in each of the sectors that we have identified for these districts. So, so there's health, there's education, there's skill development, there's financial inclusion, and there's basic infrastructure. So we want these districts to improve in all these areas. So in all these areas, we have picked about 4 to 5 indicators, what we call key performance indicators.
KPIs.
And then we rank the districts on all of these. And we have a dashboard, which is linked to the NITI Aayog website. So anyone can go and you can have a look.
So anyone in the country can go.
Anyone can go and look at it. It's called the Champions of Change dashboard.
I see.
It's fully transparently, we put it out, whatever we get in terms of data. And the rankings are updated pretty much in real time. We keep doing a regular updation of this. And that is also one of the shifts, if you see. A lot of the monitoring and evaluation that happened in the past was that we were waiting for long periods of time for data to come in. Right? Or we were doing studies over 3 years, 5 years, then getting data, then putting out a report.
So what's the update frequency now?
So with this particular dashboard, we are updating it every day, every week, every month. So you can get all these frequencies. You can actually filter the dashboard and you can say, okay, I want to see monthly, quarterly, yearly, how X district compared to Y.
So quarter upon quarter change, month upon month change, and so on.
Yes, we're doing that because again, we see the benefit in the governance realm of that, because say I am a district magistrate. I know that I might be transferred out, after 6 months, 1 year, right? 2 years, could be even less. So what is it that I can show, for my tenure? If you're going to tell me that the study you're going to do is going to take 3 years,
then you won't be able to reflect your performance.
There's no value for me, right? No, I mean, there's no way you can tell that my performance made a difference. But now if I can say that from, month to month, quarter to quarter, I can show that the intervention you did as a DM made a difference. Then there's a different motivation.
Absolutely.
So that is why we are trying to shift a lot of our monitoring and evaluation to as real time as possible. It's not feasible for everything, right? If I want to measure stunting in children, for instance.
That takes time.
That's going to take time.
Of course.
I can't do that, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. That will take time.
Yes.
But I can certainly measure that, how many more institutional deliveries have you done in your district? That I can measure. That you were doing X number this quarter and now you have improved it to Y. So we have picked up KPIs like that, which can, you can show results in a shorter period of time.
Right.
So that is the ranking and the kind of real-time monitoring we do at the district level. Now we are taking that approach to the block level.
What's a block level?
So a block is a smaller division in a district. So it's an even smaller division, but in India, even blocks are quite large. Because
because of India.
Yeah, because of India. So a district is often very large, and then of course a block is also large. But it is, in simple terms, it's just a smaller administrative division of a district.
So typically a district would have how many blocks, roughly?
It's hard to say because it differs.
It differs
a lot between districts. Depends on the size of the district, and then how many blocks it would. There's no fixed.
But it's a smaller subdivision.
It's a subdivision.
Got it.
That is how one can simply understand it. And so we're now taking the same approach that we did at the district level to blocks, because we feel that sometimes again, because of India's scale, complexity, operating at a more micro level, can give you even faster changes and even better changes. And ultimately, you need to go right down to the micro level.
Yes.
That is where you'll build up the change.
That's the grassroots.
Exactly. So we said that, because we've seen success at this district level with this Aspirational Districts program, which has in fact been recognized all over the world. It's not us who is saying, it's various academic institutions also, various people who have independently, looked at this data, looked at this model and found it to be a very powerful, governance tool that could be implemented elsewhere. So last year, based on that, the Prime Minister launched the Aspirational Blocks program. So it's still fairly newly launched, but we're trying to replicate the same template that we did with districts at blocks. So now we're going to have ranking for blocks also. Along similar lines.
I see.
So I think it's for us, it's like putting out data at multiple levels, but taking it down to the sub-state levels is where the real success lies. But is also the very challenging part. But we know that in a country like India, that's where we have to go. That's the direction we have to take. Right.
Now, you said that you have data in near real time in certain cases, in some indices. How is the data collected and how is it transmitted to NITI Aayog central location and updated?
So, over the years, we have actually constantly improved and evolved this process because we obviously get data directly from districts. So they have a certain template, a fixed template, which they fill in. And we get that data. But there's always the question of reliability of that data.
There's always the question.
Right? There's always a question of, people playing around with data or, just simply putting in the wrong data. So we also have our own independent, we work with partners. We work with agencies, research agencies who have people on the ground. And so we have these people going into these districts as well. So they independently also do data checks. Even at the stage at which the data is actually, sort of inputted into the system. There's checks at that level also. There's checks after the data comes to us also. Like we also do sanity checks to see that, is there some very outrageous number suddenly coming some quarter or, something. So we also do those checks. So there's like different layers that we try to put in. Again, obviously we recognize that there would be still issues, right? In a country like ours, we can't say it's a foolproof system.
No system is foolproof anyway.
So it would have, its limitations even now. But for the most part, we think that, it has given us reasonably good data, which we have been able to verify, even through different sources, even through triangulation that we have tried to use. And of course, as I said, we're constantly trying to improve this. And we're trying to use technology as much as possible to also streamline as well as to help us identify where, something seems very off and something seems, like it's just not right. So
right now you interface with states. I'm sure you're doing that with the state governments, the whatever the local representatives are, but you're dealing with districts and blocks. So how can you ensure that the aspirational districts or aspirational blocks are doing the right thing, but when you're not able to interface directly with them, you have to go through an intermediary, which is the state government?
Yeah. So, aspirational districts, aspirational blocks, they are a little unusual because, normally you're right that there's always this fine balance that the center doesn't want to interfere
directly,
too much with obviously what is a state government's territory. And, that is a federal structure is always a very fine, delicate balance. So in most of the schemes, for us, there's that very clear demarcation. Like, okay, this is where the center will go and then it's the state. But I think ADP, ABP from the start have been designed in such a way that it was always very clear that there is going to be a direct partnership between center, states, districts, and now blocks.
Okay.
So there is going to be there's going to be all these stakeholders involved.
Okay.
So in fact, even say for the aspirational districts program, we have what we call Prabhari officers. So, these are basically designated officers from the central government level, from the state government level, who are responsible for a particular aspirational district, responsible for overseeing its progress, what happens there, if there are any issues between the center and state, they're supposed to play as, bridges. So we have that full structure in these programs built very differently.
Okay.
These programs from the start have been designed as very collaborative, across all levels of government, which is rare, which is definitely rare. I mean, I wouldn't say all programs work like that.
Okay.
But in this one, I think it was always very clear that right from the Prime Minister, going right down to, the district magistrate, the district collector, there's a very clear chain.
A clear chain. Okay.
Yeah, and everybody is kind of linked in this program because we want to achieve these certain common goals. So I think this has been a fantastic example of cooperation. We usually talk of center states, fighting with each other and, the kind of discord which often exists. But here we've seen tremendous cooperation across all levels of government. And so I think we should really learn from this and try to replicate it in other, areas of governance also.
In the past, you said that there used to be issues between the center and the state, some kind of rivalry and some kind of friction. Yeah. What was it like, and how is the NITI Aayog solved some of that? So,
I mean, it's. I think it's again something very natural in federalism. Where you have. You have a certain set of elected representatives at the center.
Yes.
And you have a completely different set at the states.
Yes.
People, we've also seen in terms of voting, right? People often vote very differently.
Yeah.
At the center vis-a-vis the states.
Yes.
So people make different choices for different reasons.
Yeah.
And so I think naturally there's sometimes a difference in priorities. There's a difference in, alignment on how do you achieve a certain goal, which I think part of it is also healthy because that's why we are such a flourishing, federal structure. Because we need to have some of these differences, and I think these are inevitable. Like I said, if I'm sitting in Delhi, I'll have a certain perspective. But somebody sitting in Bihar or UP or Kerala or the Northeast is probably going to have a very different perspective on many things than I would. And I think so that's natural. Part of it is healthy. But a lot of it is just systemic, in terms of addressing those bottlenecks that come up, because we are such a complicated structure that even if you're trying to implement a scheme where maybe both are aligned, maybe even the center and state are philosophically aligned, but just in terms of getting the implementation to happen, it's very difficult because there's so many stakeholders involved. So that is where we try to act as that bridge for a faster resolution of issues. So if a state comes to us and says that, look, this has been pending with XYZ ministry for a long time.
Okay.
Then, we can just go to that ministry. We can go to the concerned people there and we can say that, look, can you expedite this? Can you help do that?
Okay.
So we just bring that extra attention to an issue, that a state might be having.
I see.
So it might lead to a faster resolution, of something which has otherwise just been a bottleneck or it's been a dispute of any kind. So I think I think these are very ongoing things in a center state kind of system like ours. But you do need that intermediary. You do need somebody who can present both voices to, both sides in that sense. So I think that's where we try to come in.
Okay, so you were able to present the center's voice to the states and the state's voice to the center.
Exactly.
Now, there have been historically certain parts of India that have been kind of neglected, marginalized. For example, the eastern half of India, the eastern seaboard, kind of there's less development there.
Yeah.
When it comes to the northeast, it's historically been that way.
Yeah.
So how do you address those issues? Do you focus on certain states more? I mean, you have the aspirational districts and blocks program.
Yeah.
Is that part of that?
Yeah, so aspirational districts and blocks cut across pretty much all states.
So it doesn't recognize what state it is. It's just about the parameters.
Yeah, because there we identified that, like I said, we looked at these KPIs and then, whichever districts were amongst the worst performing across the country.
Just based on the numbers.
Yeah. And of course, now we get, of course, there's a certain concentration that, in certain poorer states, we have more naturally, aspirational districts, and they're also larger states, right? So, UP is a very large state. So it'll have proportionately more districts than, say, a smaller state. But otherwise, it was not decided, based on the state. It was just decided based on the level of development of the district and now the block. But we also have other specialized initiatives, where we try to develop certain specific states or help with the development. Also, like we have a specific initiative for the Northeast.
Okay.
And NITI, has even had a Northeast Council, where we have tried to bring together all the chief ministers of the Northeastern states.
I see.
Because we do recognize that those states have unique but shared challenges. So states in that region have unique challenges compared to the rest of the country, but amongst themselves, a lot of those challenges are common.
Very similar, yeah.
So we've tried to bring them together at a political level, at a policy level, and engage with them, identify, various roadmaps in various sectors. And so even a lot of the push that you would see of the government, whether it's on infrastructure in the Northeast, or tourism or various other things. We certainly provide a lot of the inputs for all of that because we work with these states, at the highest level, and we try to look at them as a block, because I think there's a lot of synergies otherwise we miss out on. In everybody trying to do things on their own. Yeah. It's like you're reinventing the wheel.
Why not work together?
Constantly. But when you have the same challenge, then, you can actually just work together. You can share your experiences. And I think that's another thing we do a lot is, helping states just share with each other. Because we constantly talk of looking outside India for good practices. Yes. For best practices. Whenever you hear of a best practice, people say, Acha, that happened in UK or that happened in Finland or that happened here or there. Yeah. But I said that, why don't you look at your own country? Indeed. Lot of good practices are happening. It's just that we don't know about it.
We're not sharing that information.
Yeah,
we're talking to each other.
Exactly. We're not sharing with each other even. So that is a platform we try to provide. That, just share with each other, what your common challenges are, what solutions have you implemented that have worked for you in the past that could now work for others. So that is something that we try to do a lot with various sets of states also. So Northeastern, Himalayan, coastal states. Okay. So we also look at, groupings like that. But of course, we also work with individual states because a lot of them do want to engage in a very deep manner. And in fact, last year, only we have really, last year before that, we really started the state support mission. Okay. Which is specifically an initiative to work with states, handhold them very closely in different sectors, and help them build their plans for right up to India at 2047. Okay. So the Prime Minister has kind of given us this overarching goal that, Viksit Bharat at 2047, India at 2047. Now we know that again, it's not going to be just one journey of Viksit Bharat to 2047. Every state is going to have its
lots journey. Of individual journeys, but together.
Exactly. So, but they, will all add up. Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, that is what we're trying to do. So we're helping each of these states develop those roadmaps. Okay. To 2047 and also of course helping them in different sectors. We have our own in-house experts, who help them. We're also getting experts from the outside wherever it's required. Suppose a state has a very specific need in a particular area, then we'll try and match them, with that required expertise. We're doing a lot of capacity building for states. So that is an initiative, again, that we have launched specifically to engage with states.
Now, there's one sector that I always speak about, which I think India is a potential superpower in, which is tourism. And lots of states have different kind of tourism potential. Some have great cuisine, some have great culture, some have great natural environments. So how do you help each state individually? Is tourism one of your KPIs?
Yes, tourism is definitely an important area that we're working on as part of the overall economic job creation.
GDP, it can contribute significantly.
Absolutely. So yes, so I think again, whether it is something like tourism or any other sector for that matter, we look at the state's strengths individually. Because every state has its own strengths, as you said.
Yes.
So I think we look at it individually. Of course, we do feel that there are many things which we should try and push across the board, like medical tourism. Medical tourism is an example. Where we feel that of course there's a lot that we need to do also for our own population. So it's not that it's at the cost of that. But equally now, with the advent of technology, and COVID, which really gave a fillip to the use of technology in our country.
Yes.
We're really at the cutting edge, of using technology in many sectors, including in healthcare. So there's a lot that we can do, even in terms of medical tourism. But I think every state we look at, okay, what is the specific, natural endowment either in this state, or what is their strength? And then build on that. In fact, even linking it to exports, for instance, so we had this whole one district, one product. Kind of mantra that the PM had given, which is to say that, every district you identify what is your most unique product, and how can you market that, take that to a global level. So I think that is also very linked to tourism, because that's how people will know about different, not just states, but districts in India and what they have to offer. So I think, and of course, also links to entrepreneurship, because, a lot of people are now trying to promote these products as entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And offer them to the world, not just to India. So I think there's a lot of these kind of initiatives we do, but certainly the idea now is that we don't have any one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to work with each state on their own merit.
Right.
And that is what we need to capitalize on and build on. So I think that is the approach.
You mentioned entrepreneurship. So is there any means that NITI Aayog has to involve the private sector in all of this?
Yeah, so in fact, again, we are one very important platform, where a lot of the private sector comes with their issues, their challenges.
I see.
And I mean, I've worked at NITI a lot on the health side of things, medical devices, pharma. So we've constantly, engaged with people from the industry, both larger players as well as startups. And in fact, right back in 2017, when NITI Aayog had just about, just a couple of years into its existence, we had done a huge flagship event called the Champions of Change. Where the Prime Minister had himself directly reached out to big, private players as well as smaller, startups in different sectors. And after that, we formed groups of these organizations, and I'm still in touch with, actively involved with, the group we formed on health, for instance. And basically the idea is that we constantly get their inputs, whether we're trying to think of a new policy, we're trying to think of a new regulation, we get feedback from them.
So you want to hear from them?
Yeah, both proactively as well as getting them to react to something we might have introduced, brought in. So we are actually one of the very important, platforms in the government system where anybody pretty much can come with their issues, even to say that this policy is not working for us or this regulation is affecting us badly. We obviously can't resolve everything 100% or ourselves.
But you can pass on the message.
But we pass on the message to the relevant line ministry to say that, look, this is the feedback we're getting from industry or from any other stakeholder. So I think that is also one very big role we are starting to play now, is engaging with a very broad set of experts, and it's not just at our level. The Prime Minister himself does it. He's had several meetings, at NITI Aayog, before budgets, also before union budgets are announced, where we specifically call in a group of economists, experts, which also includes people from the private sector, from different sectors, and they actually very freely give him, freely, directly, give him their views, their opinions, their feedback on what's working, what's not working, what they think that we should be doing. So we have routinely organized these sessions also, so that it's not just us doing things at our level, but he, as the chairperson of the NITI Aayog, himself gets that feedback, from all these different stakeholders. So we've had some very good meetings like that also.
I see. Now, one of the specific parts of the private sector is the startups.
Yeah.
And we have this big initiative called Startup India. So is NITI Aayog involved at some level with Startup India?
Yeah, I think, definitely we work very closely with the whole startup, ecosystem. And that's where I also said that AIM comes in for us, the Atal Innovation Mission, because innovation, entrepreneurship, startups, it's all very, very closely linked, obviously. And so I think we are trying to bring it very early into people's lives.
Okay.
Of course, we do want to support people who are already entrepreneurs. They're already looking for funding. They're already at that stage, right, where they have a mature product or a service or something that they're offering. But we equally want to start with young kids, who might just have an idea. And so we have these Atal Tinkering Labs in schools, so which just as the name suggests, they are for kids to basically just test different ideas, try out different things. And a lot of those ideas we find are actually, even moving to the next level where there is some interest, to take those forward, or there is potential in those ideas. So then, of course, we link up, with the startup community as well. We provide mentorship to these kids, through that community. So there's definitely a very close, alignment. And it's just that I think we have that very important mandate that, you bring entrepreneurship, innovation into children's lives at a very early age. Don't wait, for something that, we'll think about it later in our lives. But it's something that can be even if you don't become an entrepreneur, but innovation as a way of thinking is something that we want to cultivate very early on.
Right. You mentioned that the Prime Minister has frequent meetings with NITI Aayog. So what exactly is the kind of role that the Prime Minister plays in the functioning of NITI Aayog, and what kind of interaction is there?
Yeah, so I think, we get obviously all our mandate and guidance from him. I mentioned to you about the federalism part, what kind of role we have to play with states, or now Viksit Bharat. That has all come from him, obviously. But we also have what we call a governing council.
Okay.
There's a NITI Aayog governing council, which has the Prime Minister, which has, of course, the vice chairman of NITI Aayog, and all the state chief ministers and lieutenant governors are part of this. Okay,
governing council.
Yes, of NITI's governing council.
I see.
So we in fact have these meetings typically once in a year.
Okay.
Where we had it last year as well, in May, where all the chief ministers, lieutenant governors convene together with the Prime Minister, the Vice Chairman, our members. We also have 4 members in NITI Aayog. So these are people who are in the rank of a Minister of State.
Okay.
And they are experts in specific sectors.
I see.
So we have one member who's an expert in health, Then we have one who's an expert in defense and, science and technology. In agriculture, we have another one, and another one in economics and finance.
I see.
So, so all of these people are present in one room, basically, in NITI's governing council meeting.
Okay.
And that is really where the high level, agenda gets discussed.
I see.
All CMs, LGs, they provide their feedback on, what is happening, what obviously is working from their point of view, what isn't. There are various sectoral issues which are discussed. Like when we had COVID, then, we would discuss that how do we strengthen the response? How can we make the vaccination efforts better? So whatever is topical in terms of policy developmental priorities at that time are discussed. And this is probably the only such forum, where you have the entire political leadership in a sense of the country, central and state, coming together
in one room. Very, very, very rare. Isn't it?
Very rare.
Yes.
Yeah, very rare. So I think that's another very powerful medium through which the Prime Minister engages. But it's constant, regular engagement, obviously through our Vice Chairman, through our CEO, through our members. But we're constantly getting his feedback on, various things, where we should be playing a role, what should we be doing. And I think that is what is very motivating for a lot of the young people who work at NITI Aayog also, and I can say that personally because, I have my own experience of that I think you feel that, okay, the work I'm doing is kind of having some meaning, resonance at the highest levels, at the highest level possible. So I think that is very motivating. For young people coming in from outside the system. Maybe for a bureaucrat, it's not something which is so exciting because, they do it for a living, they do it their whole lives. But especially, I can say for the lateral entrants, for the young people coming in from outside the government, it's very motivating.
Very much
to know that the Prime Minister himself is so engaged in what the institution does. So I think that's a very strong part of the institution.
Right. Now, ma'am, your background is in health, isn't it? So first of all, we had this monumental challenge the country and the world faced, which was COVID, like 2-3 years. What was the role that NITI Aayog played in guiding us through that huge challenge?
Yeah, so we played a very big role in COVID. In fact, so we have a member, Dr. Vinod Paul, and he was, the chairperson of one of the empowered groups. Empowered groups were set up by the Prime Minister at that time, and these were basically high-level officials.
Okay.
To address this kind of emergency crisis situation, he felt that we needed these groups to kind of facilitate decision making, make it very quick, and also track different aspects of the pandemic response. Because when you are responding to a pandemic, there's many different aspects.
Yes.
Even within health, there's different aspects of testing, of treatment, of hospitals, oxygen, ventilators.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many things even within health.
Yes.
And then, of course, outside health, right? There's the economic dimensions of handling the pandemic. There's all the adversities that people face, which are outside the health system. So we had groups, and Dr. Paul was chairing the Empowered Group 1, which was basically tasked with the overall, medical planning for this pandemic.
Okay.
So we had to come up with estimates. We had to come up with forecasts based on, information that we were getting in real time, in terms of how many cases we expected to see in a particular state, how they should plan, in terms of their oxygen availability, their beds, so we were doing a lot of complicated kind of analysis, modeling, everything, forecasting in a very fast changing situation,
Yes.
very unpredictable. Nobody knew which way it's going to go. So I was working with him, in fact, on this, in this task force. And I was every day I would be tracking, where each district is in the country in terms of cases, in terms of fatalities, what are the patterns, because it's based on this only that we could make our plans. We could do our resource allocation. We could decide how many ventilators should go where.
Yes.
So all of that was happening. Then also our CEO, at that time, Mr. Amitabh Khan, He was in charge of the Empowered Group, which was looking at bringing in the support of civil society.
Okay.
So that was again a very powerful kind of a platform to bring in civil society, to bring in private sector contributions, because we also needed to do a lot of behavior change. And government at that time, you're pulled in like 1,000 different directions.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you cannot do everything possibly.
Yeah.
Even in the best of times, government cannot do everything, but certainly not in a crisis.
Yeah.
So we needed those organizations to also come and partner with us to make people aware of wearing masks, of hand washing, or even just distributing basic supplies. We needed people on the ground, right? So he was coordinating with all these external stakeholders in a way, private sector, startups, NGOs, to join them with the government's response. And honestly, I think that whatever response that we managed to have would not have been possible, if we did not have all these stakeholders come together. And again, that's very rare for us. We usually struggle. We usually struggle to have this kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration. We talk about it all the time, but it's normally very hard to achieve, because everybody has a different kind of view of looking at things, or your interests don't align with the others. Your way of doing things doesn't align. So a lot of the times, even public-private partnerships don't work, But in this crisis situation, we saw everyone pulling their weight, from the smallest startup to, of course, government. And when I mean government, not just central, but state governments obviously had to suddenly do a lot, faced with this situation. And also the private sector, the civil society, everybody came together. So I think, in fact, the real lesson for us was this, that, when everybody can come together like this.
Why can't we do it on a more regular basis?
Yeah, because there's probably a lot we can achieve, a lot more, if we do that. So that is something that NITI was also involved with. So overall, I would say that, and Dr. Paul, I knew, almost every other day he was at a review by the Prime Minister, who was, himself reviewing the situation. Because, I was working directly with him. I was providing him the data, the analysis. So I know that, literally every day those meetings were happening, that monitoring was happening. Of course, this is in the intensive phase of the pandemic, but it was for a long period of time that, this very intensive kind of monitoring continued.
So you were involved in essentially the day-to-day firefighting during the pandemic. But after it all subsides, then in hindsight, we can see that India's response was probably the best among all the major countries in the world. Look at our friends in China. They struggled so badly. So what is it that set us apart? And how did we achieve this? Typically, when we think of the government, we don't think of excellence, but that's what we achieved. So what is it that set us apart? Yeah,
I think, definitely for a country as large as ours and with such complexity and so many challenges.
Yes.
I thought, and I'm somebody from a public health background, so, I'm always actually skeptical. I'm myself always questioning, that we're not doing enough, we should do more, But I really thought that we did extremely well, and much better than I would have personally expected a country like us to, be able to do, because it was a truly unpredictable situation. We never had those protocols in place. We never knew that, okay, COVID patient comes in, what do we do? Right? What is the next thing that we did not even know any of that. And the world didn't know. When I say we, it's not just India. The WHO was changing its advisories all the time.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes they would say wear a mask. Sometimes they would say, no, it's airborne. No, then it's not airborne. Constantly those advisories were changing.
So at some point in time, you stopped listening to them.
Yeah. So I think because that was the nature of, this virus. People really, we took a lot of time to understand it, and we still don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
We're still, discovering new facets of it every day.
Yes.
Whether we call it long COVID or whatever we want to call it. But we're discovering something new every day about this virus. So back then when it started out, we knew nothing. And so, in fact, a lot of people questioned and criticized that initial lockdown, that it was a very bad decision. And I've written a lot about it also, and why I think that it was, from a health point of view at least, fully justified. And I've given all the data and the numbers for why I think, and a lot of it is the comparison with the other countries. Countries which imposed that lockdown even a few days later. The kind of mayhem we saw there, whether it was UK, whether it was France,
UK is a shining
Spain,
example.
Italy. But then, countries which have such advanced health systems, like a Finland, Sweden, Denmark, they struggle too.
Yes.
And they have some of the most advanced, sophisticated health systems in the world.
Yes.
So I think, we, after that initial lockdown decision, which I think was very justified in terms of, in purely the health sense of things, definitely, I think we very quickly ramped up, whether it's our production of masks, sanitizers, PPE kits, ventilators. So in terms of our whole manufacturing side, and that's where I think the public-private collaboration worked brilliantly. Because we couldn't ramp up so quickly otherwise.
Without
we went from zero to being completely self-sufficient in a very short period of time. So I think that was one part of the response that worked very well. The other was, of course, our whole vaccine research, which very, very early on in parallel, the Prime Minister had kind of really pushed for. That we should have, our own vaccine. We need to, really go ahead on this front. So again, a great example of collaboration, between academia, between industry, government, everybody. Then I think we did a very good job, with the behavior change. I honestly did not think that so many Indians would be wearing masks, because I've never seen that, here. And as a public health person, I kind of always been telling people that in a public place, in a very crowded place, you should try to wear a mask, it's just good for you in general, COVID or no COVID. But there's no adoption of these kind of things, right? But in COVID, I was amazed.
It was almost universal.
Yeah, even if people were just tying a handkerchief, even if they didn't have a proper surgical mask or whatever, but that behavior had been adopted, which for me was a phenomenal change to achieve in a very short period of time.
Yes.
Behavior change normally takes years.
Oh, yeah.
If not more. So I think there we did very well. And I think a lot of credit again to our civil society organizations there, our various faith-based organizations I saw, they really stepped up. They did so much, charitable work, apart from obviously government efforts. But I think these were all very important contributions. So I think that was again a very crucial part of our response. And I think, the fact that we, through this process, ended up putting in place a lot of these standard operating protocols, which I told you didn't exist before. So if a patient comes, how do you deal with that? Or, how do you do contact tracing? That, once you've got a patient, then how do you kind of look for others who might have been infected by him or her? So contact tracing or testing. We ramped up our testing a lot. Rapid antigen, RT-PCRs. None of these were being produced, certainly not at this level in our country before. But we were able to ramp up very quickly. So I think that is why I'm saying that it was a great example of collaboration amongst all stakeholders in a very short time. And without that, we would have definitely not achieved any of this.
Right. Now, when it comes to NITI Aayog, I'm sure that other governments, other nations also have similar organizations. In various kinds. Is there any interfacing that we have between NITI Aayog and these other nations, some kind of public diplomacy or something? I know that Mr. Kant was the Sherpa in the G20 and he pulled off a stupendous job. So how is that like? Yeah,
there are, similar bodies in at least some countries, or even if not exactly the same, but, they're similar. In terms of planning, broadly planning functions. So yes, we do interact. At the vice chairman level, at the CEO level, there's a lot of engagement that, we have with such organizations. Like recently the vice chairman had visited Singapore, and he really spent a lot of time understanding, because they are known for their good governance in various ways.
Yes.
Although of course it's a much smaller, so that is what I always say whenever we're trying to learn from anyone else, that like obviously replicating in anything in the Indian context is fraught with tremendous challenges just because of our size.
Yes.
But there's still a lot we can learn, in terms of the principles of it. And so he spent a lot of time just, with different parts of the government, trying to understand, that how do they go about their planning, especially their long-term planning. Because Singapore does a lot of long-term planning. They try to stay ahead of the game always. They'll always think futuristically. And now we're trying to do that with Viksit Bharat. So we have to learn, from other nations who have got good ways of, long-term planning, of thinking into the future. So that is something that we're trying to, really learn. We're also trying to learn the best of kind of data governance. And in fact, Australia has a very good, system whereby they look at their whole data. And so we spent a lot of time, learning from them, trying to understand. Because like I said, data is a very important function that we also perform. And so I think, we are constantly interacting with, delegations from overseas or, our own officials who visit overseas to various countries to learn from them. But of course, we recognize that our context is very unique. So we might not be able to implement everything.
Of course.
But we can learn. Certainly we can learn. And that is something that we are always very open to doing.
Right. So NITI Aayog has already undergone quite a journey in the time period that it has existed. What's the future going to look like for NITI Aayog? I'm sure it's going to keep evolving. Let's say 10, 15 years down the line, what is the role of NITI Aayog going to be like?
It's very hard to say because, like you said, I mean, things change too rapidly.
These days, they change very rapidly.
So, in fact, even as we are planning to 2047, we keep telling ourselves that we just don't know what is going to happen and how dramatically the world might change, even in a matter of months or years.
Yes.
So, of course, we always keep that at the back of our mind. But I think the overall vision as it stands and, how we would like to develop is very much, into the best, at least one of them, or if not the best kind of policy think tank. And really, that's our tagline, that we're the premier policy think tank of the government of India. And we really want to live up to that. So we want to perform all the think tank functions, of course, as well as we can, whether it's bringing in, like I said, best of research, best of ideas, fresh thinking, innovation, into policy making. So I think that is something we really strive to do. And on the other hand, really become this very strong partner and bridge, between the center and the states.
Right.
So I think two major things, if we look at, those are the two things we're both pushing for, to sort of achieve excellence in. We're still a relatively new institution, obviously, if you compare to the Planning Commission. Which was around for much longer. So we are still evolving in many different ways. But I think as of now, these are two pillars, that we really see for ourselves and pathways to achieving that excellence of, being one of the best policy think tanks.
My final question to you is, what's your role in NITI Aayog been like and what's your journey been like overall?
So, I actually joined in 2016.
Okay.
And I was interviewed by the then Vice Chairman, Dr. Arvind Panagaria.
Okay.
And also Mr. Amitabh Kant, who was the CEO. So I was interviewed by him, and I'll tell you a funny kind of anecdote from that interview, because I thought that interview went terribly.
Okay.
Because he asked me a lot of questions in health. And, I answered just exactly as I thought I should, because I had no inhibitions. I had not Googled him before, and I didn't really know anything about his stature or, so I, without any inhibitions, I just said what I thought. And then when I came out of the interview and I Googled him and I Googled his views on health, some of them were a little contradictory to what I had said,
I see.
And so I called up my mother. I said, I'm not going to get this job because, I didn't even really know who this person is and his views on health. And, I just said what I wanted to, So she said, okay, anyway, let's see. And then just a couple of days later, I got a call that, you have been selected.
Okay.
And then I met Dr. Panagaria and he said, I was very impressed by your knowledge of the health sector. So, of course, that shows that he's somebody with also a very large heart, which I went on to see as I worked with him.
I see.
That despite being a great economist and intellectual, he was always very open to contrarian views, or different views. So I think that was something that always stood out for me. So I joined his team and I was working on the 3-year action agenda that NITI Aayog brought out at that time, because, we used to have 5-year plans that the Planning Commission used to make. So those no longer happen now. So we came out with a 3-year action agenda, which was just to say that in different sectors, what are some of the key issues that the government should be working on.
Right.
So I worked on that. I worked with him very closely on the reform of medical education. So there were 3 medical education bills, which NITI Aayog was involved with drafting. And in fact, the Medical Council of India, that's how got replaced with the National Medical Commission.
Okay.
And similarly, in Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy, the councils governing those bodies of education were also replaced based on the bills we had drafted. And then they went on to be passed in Parliament and they became acts, etc. So I worked on that also with him. And then subsequently, I worked with also the next vice chairman, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Again, this time, we were working on a 7-year strategy document, which also was released in December 2018.
I see.
And then I worked a lot with Dr. Paul on the COVID response, very, very closely. With Mr. Amitabh Kant, I worked on a whole host of issues because, he remained the CEO throughout this period. So, I worked with him on various health-related social sector issues, Aspirational Districts program also, SDGs,
Okay.
And now I've been working, with the present vice chairman and CEO. Directly, of course, I'm working with Mr. Berry, Suman Berry, who's the vice chairman. And with him, I look at actually various kinds of issues. It's not just health or social sectors, but even a lot of the G20 related issues, because he was quite, active in terms of engagement on the G20 presidency. So, so it's been a great journey, a very long journey, because most people don't stay that long. People like me, they will maybe stay 3-4 years and they, go move on to something else. But I really have found the institution to be a very interesting place, from a policy point of view, and the kind of exposure that one can get to policy making at the highest levels. I don't think any other institution would provide, that. So I think it's very challenging, no doubt, on one hand, but it's also been an exciting ride.
All right. So you have laid out a very broad overview of what the organization does. I learned a lot. I hope the audience learned a lot. And thank you so much for explaining all this. Thank you for the great work you've been doing. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope you really enjoyed this conversation and gained something of genuine value from it. Subscribe now. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.